Chapter 3. I was wrong. Accepting responsibility. As a boss, Larry usually stays calm, but on this particular day, he ran out of patience. He spoke harshly to one of his employees. The message was true and the reproof needed, but he had spoken in anger and his words had been cutting. Afterward, he felt bad but told himself, what I said was true and the guy needs to shape up. He needs to know I'm not a pushover. Jane had trouble remembering appointments, especially those that fell on the weekend when she often failed to look at her calendar. Now she was again arriving halfway through a neighborhood planning meeting. Jane's mind ran through a list of reasons for her confusion about the meeting time. At the top of the list was her recent return from a cross-country trip. She didn't know what day it was, much less what time it was. Meanwhile, the others at the meeting felt she owed them an apology for again showing up late. Young Sean was in pain following a medical procedure. His mom was hovering, trying to make him comfortable and insisting that he take his pain medication. Unfortunately, Sean swatted away his well-meaning mother. Sean knew that his action was unkind and degrading, but he told himself, medicine can make anyone act crazy. My mom should understand. 3 different scenarios: unkind words, failure to come through, and lashing out. Larry, Jane, and Sean all felt a tug of guilt. However, their excuses, they felt, covered their need to apologize. Such actions have fractured relationships. A simple apology could make a world of difference, but an apology means accepting responsibility for one's actions. Why is it so difficult for some of us to say, I was wrong? Often, our reluctance to admit wrongdoing is tied to our sense of self-worth. To admit that we are wrong is perceived as a weakness. We may reason, only losers confess. Intelligent people try to show that their actions were justified. The seeds of this self-justifying tendency are often planted in childhood. When a child is excessively punished, condemned, or shamed for minor offenses, the sense of self-worth is diminished. Subconsciously, the child makes the emotional link between wrong behavior and low self-worth. Thus, to admit is to be bad. The child who grows up with this emotional pattern will have difficulty admitting wrongdoings as an adult because to do so strikes at his or her self-esteem. The good news is that as adults, we can understand these negative emotional patterns and yet not be imprisoned by them. The reality is, there are no perfect adults. Mature adults learn how to break the harmful patterns of childhood and accept responsibility for their own failures. But immature adults are forever rationalizing their own bad behavior. It's not my fault. Such rationalization often takes the form of blaming others. We may admit that what we did or said was not the best, but our behavior was provoked by the other person's irresponsible actions. Thus, we blame others and find it difficult to admit I was wrong. Such blaming is also a sign of immaturity. Children by nature blame others for their negative behavior. I remember a time when my 6-year-old son, confronted with knocking a glass off the table that now lay shattered on the floor, explained, "It did it by itself." To this day, my wife and I will jokingly say to each other when confronted with an irresponsible action, "It did it by itself." We both know that we are joking, but it feels so good to place the blame on it rather than me. Mature adults learn to accept responsibility for their behavior, whereas immature adults continue with childish fantasies and tend to blame others for their mistakes. As the heart of accepting responsibility for one's behavior is willingness to admit, I was wrong. Paul J. Meyer, founder of Success Motivation Incorporated and co-author of Chicken Soup for the Golden Soul, said, "One of the most important success factors is the willingness to admit when you're wrong." I agree with Spencer Johnson, MD, who said, "Few things are more powerful than having the common sense, wisdom, and strength to admit when you've made a mistake and to set things right. Learning to say, I was wrong, is a major step toward becoming a responsible and successful adult." It's like he can do no wrong. Many people need to hear the very words, I was wrong, I accept responsibility, as a part of the reconciliation process. Understanding this reality can make all the difference in the world when you sincerely wish to apologize for your behavior. Joy and Rich were in my office after 5 years of marriage. Financially, things were going well. Rich had landed a good job upon graduating from college. Joy had worked full-time for the first 2 years until the baby came. Both sets of in-laws lived in town and were willing babysitters. Therefore, Rich and Joy had been able to enjoy a fair amount of leisure time together. In Joy's words, "Really, our lives are wonderful. The only problem is, Rich is never willing to apologize. When he gets upset because things don't go his way, he lashes out at me in anger. Instead of apologizing, he blames me for his anger. It's like he can do no wrong." When I turned to Rich, he said, "I don't think it's right to apologize for something when it's not your fault. I do get mad, but it's because she puts me down and makes me feel like I'm not a good father. I spend as much time with our son as I can, but every week she nags me by making remarks such as, 'Your son's not going to know you if you don't spend more time with him.' I have to work hard on my job, and when I get home, I'm tired. I need some time to unwind. I can't walk in the house and spend 2 hours playing with Ethan." "I never asked you to spend 2 hours," Joy answered. 15 minutes would be a good place to start." "That's what I'm talking about," said Rich. "If I spent 15 minutes, I'll guarantee you she'll be asking for 25 next week. I can't please her no matter what I do." It was obvious to me that Joy's comments were striking at Rich's self-esteem. He wanted to be a good father, and her comments suggesting that he was a failure. He was unwilling to accept that conclusion, and his way of expressing his hurt was to lash out with angry words. The fact is, both Joy and Richard needed to apologize. The problem was that neither thought that he or she had done anything wrong. Neither of them intended to hurt the other, yet both of them were guilty of treating each other unkindly. How Rich grew up. When I met with Rich alone, it didn't take long to discover why Joy's comments about his needing to spend more time with Ethan had bothered him so much. He grew up in a home where his father was gone most of the time. Usually he left the house on Sunday evenings and returned Friday afternoons. The weekends were spent golfing and watching sports events. Rich had played golf with his father a few times in high school, and occasionally they watched a football game together. But Rich went off to college with a feeling that he really didn't know his father. He vowed that would never happen if he had a child, and that he would find a way to connect, that his son would know he was loved. Rich's angry response mirrored what he had seen his mother do to his dad, lashing out at him. Rich identified with his mother's pain and felt that she was justified in her treatment of his dad. Now, as an adult, he felt justified in the harsh but true words he spoke to Joy, so he felt no need to admit wrongdoing. I tried to help Rich understand that the parental example he had grown up with was not necessarily a healthy model. He readily agreed that his father and mother did not have a loving, caring, supportive marriage he desired. I told them that as long as he followed his parents' model, such a marriage would remain an ideal, not a reality. And I tried to help him see the difference between understanding why we do what we do and accepting what we do. It was easy to understand why Rich responded the way he did to Joy, but to accept that behavior as appropriate was to destroy the very thing he wanted, an intimate marriage. The agree-disagree approach. I challenged him to a new approach. It is an approach that has helped many couples live successfully in the world of human failure. I call it agree-disagree. I agree that I have a right to feel hurt, angry, disappointed, and frustrated, or whatever else I may be feeling. I don't choose my feelings, I simply experience them. On the other hand, I disagree with the idea that because of my feelings, I have the right to hurt someone else with my words or behavior. To hurt my spouse because my spouse has hurt me is like declaring civil war, a war where there are no winners. Therefore, I will seek to express my emotions in a way that will not be hurtful to my spouse, but will hold potential for reconciliation. We worked together on a statement that Rich might deliver that would accomplish this objective. Here's what we came up with. Honey, I love you very much, and I love Ethan very much. I want more than anything to be a good husband and a good father. Maybe I wanted even more because I didn't have a close relationship with my dad, and I saw my folks fight each other all the time. Therefore, I want to share something with you that hurts me very deeply, and I want to ask you to help me find a solution. When I heard you say last night, if you don't spend more time with Ethan, he's going to grow up not knowing who you are, I felt a dagger pierce my heart. In fact, I went up to the office and cried because that's the last thing in the world I want to happen. Will you help me work on my schedule so that I can have meaningful time with Ethan and yet be able to work and meet our financial needs? I assured Rich that I believed Joy would respond positively to such a statement. He agreed. Then I said, I've worked with people long enough to know that simply having a new plan will not necessarily stop the old patterns. Chances are, sometime within the next few weeks, you will revert to your old pattern of lashing out with angry words to Joy when she makes a comment to you. It's not what you want to do, but you will do it before you think. This is when an apology is necessary. I think you will agree that yelling at one's wife is not kind, loving, tender, or positive. Rich was nodding his head. Therefore, it is wrong. I reminded him that the New Testament scriptures challenge husbands to love their wives and care for them, seeking to meet the needs as Christ did for the church. Screaming at a wife does not fit the formula for a successful marriage. Rich was nodding again. Please, I want you to learn to say the words, last night I lost my temper. I yelled at you and said some pretty nasty things. I was wrong to do that. It was not tender, it was not loving, and it was not kind. I know I hurt you very much, and I'm sorry because I don't want to hurt you. I want to ask you to forgive me. I know I was wrong. Rich wrote the words down in his iPhone. We prayed together and asked God's help as Rich sought to implement his new approach for handling hurt and anger. It was a heavy session, but I felt that Rich was open to change. Joy's challenge to forgive. My session with Joy was more difficult. Not because she didn't want to have a better marriage, but because she found it almost impossible to understand how a man could rage at his wife in anger if he really loved her. To her, the two were incompatible. Therefore, she had come to question Rich's love for her. I expressed empathy for her perspective, but tried to help her understand that all of us are imperfect lovers. It is true that perfect love would never hurt the one loved, but none of us are capable for perfect love, for one simple reason: we are imperfect. The Bible makes this very clear. We are all sinners. Even those who say they are Christians are still capable of sinning. This is why we must learn to confess our sins to God and to the person we've sinned against. Good marriages are not dependent upon perfection, but they are dependent upon a willingness to acknowledge our wrong and to seek forgiveness. I could tell that Joy theoretically agreed with what I was saying. She had been brought up in the church and she knew these realities, but the emotional pain that she had felt from Rich's harsh words made it very difficult for her to forgive him. Especially when he never apologizes, she said. I agreed with her that an apology was an integral part of forgiveness and reconciliation. I asked her what she expected to hear in a genuine apology. I want it to be sincere, she said. I don't want him to just say, I'm sorry that you got hurt. I want him to acknowledge that what he did was wrong. It hurts so badly, she said. How can he just walk away and never apologize? How could he not realize how wrong it is to scream at someone? For the next 30 minutes, Joy and I talked about the relationship between hurt and self-esteem. I tried to explain to her the emotional dynamics of Rich's family and why her comments about his not being a good father hurt him so deeply. They may have been true, at least from her perspective, but to him, it was like a verbal bomb exploding in his soul. His natural response was to fight back, just as he had often seen his mother do. Can he change his ways, having grown up with this model? She asked. That's the wonderful thing about being human, I said. We are capable of change, especially if we reach out for God's help. I believe that Rich is sincere, and I believe that he's beginning to understand himself better. I also believe that you will see significant change in the future, I added. I hope so, replied Joy. I love him so much, and I want us to have a good marriage. I know we're in real trouble. I just hope it's not too late. We ended our session talking about how Joy might express her own concerns about Richard spending time with Ethan in a positive way that would not strike at his self-esteem. I suggested that if she would make a specific request of Rich, it would less likely be taken as condemnation. A suggestion or a request is very different from a demand. We explored the kinds of things she might request of Rich. Here's part of the list we came up with. Would you play Chutes and Ladders with Ethan while I finish getting the meal prepared? Could the three of us take a walk after dinner? Could you read Ethan a story while I run his bath water? Could you play with Ethan in the sandbox for a few minutes later? I could see that Joy was getting the idea of specific requests rather than general complaints. I challenged her. Never more than one request per week, okay? And when he does things with Ethan, always give him an affirming word. Tell him how proud you are of the good job he is doing as a father. Tell him how much you appreciate him playing with Ethan while you finish the meal. Don't let anything go unnoticed or unaffirmed. Since Rich wants desperately to be a good father, when you affirm him, you are building his self-esteem, and you are creating a positive emotional climate between the two of you. The next 4 sessions with Rich and Joy were fully as productive as the first 3. It was exciting to see them gain new insights about themselves, recognize their past emotional patterns, and develop new ways of responding to each other. Rich learned to say, "I was wrong," when, on occasion, he spoke harshly to Joy. She also learned to say, "I was wrong, and I'm sorry I hurt you," when she would slip and make a negative comment about his skills as a father. It became obvious in the course of our counseling that Rich's primary apology language was, "I'm sorry." When Joy said these words, he was ready to forgive her. On the other hand, Joy's primary apology language was, "I was wrong." What she wanted to sense was that Rich knew that his angry words were wrong. Their marriage took a giant step forward when she learned to express real regret, and he learned to accept responsibility for his wrong behavior, and they learned to verbalize it to each other. The power of "I was wrong." For many people, the most important part of an apology is acknowledging that one's behavior was wrong. Linda from Seattle said to me, "My husband will not admit that he ever does anything wrong. He just sweeps it under the rug and doesn't want to talk about it anymore. If I bring it up again, he will say, 'I don't know what I did. Why can't you just forget it?' If he could admit that he was wrong, I would be willing to forgive him. But when he acts like he did nothing wrong, it's terribly difficult to overlook it." As tears came to her eyes, she said, "I just wish I could hear him say one time, 'I was wrong.'" Alyssa is 27. While growing up, her dad told her that a wise person is willing to accept responsibility for his or her mistakes. I'll never forget what he said. "All of us make mistakes, but the only mistake that will destroy you is the one you are unwilling to admit." I remember when I was young and would do something against the rules, he would look at me and ask, "Do you have something you'd like to say?" He would smile and I would say, "I made a mistake. I was wrong. Will you forgive me?" He would give me a hug and say, "You are forgiven." Admitting my mistakes is part of who I am, and I owe it to my father. 5 years ago, Alyssa married David, whom she described as the perfect, most honest man I'd ever met. She adds, "I don't mean he's perfect. I mean he's always willing to admit his failures." I guess that's why I love David so much, because he has always been willing to say, "I made a mistake. I was wrong. Will you forgive me?" I like a person who is willing to accept responsibility for his mistakes. Michael, a 24-year-old single, never heard his father apologize to his mother or him. At 18, he left home and has never returned to visit. "I felt that my father was hypocritical," he explained. "In the community, he was recognized as a successful man, but in my mind, he was a hypocrite. I guess that's why I've always been quick to apologize, willing to admit my failures. I want my relationships to be real, and I know that that can't happen if I'm not willing to admit I was wrong." For people like Michael, if you want them to sense the sincerity of your apology, you might use statements like these. Statements of accepting responsibility. I know that what I did was wrong. I could try to excuse myself, but there is no excuse. Pure and simple, what I did was selfish and wrong. I made a big mistake. At the time, I didn't think about what I was doing, but in retrospect, I guess that's the problem. I wish I had thought before I acted. What I did was wrong. The way I spoke to you was wrong. I spoke out of anger, trying to justify myself. The way I talked to you was unkind and unloving. I hope you will forgive me. I repeated a mistake that we've discussed before. I really messed up. I know that it was my fault. Talk about it. Name a few of the most outrageous excuses you have ever heard people claim for refusing to admit wrongdoing. Why do you think these people have such a difficult time admitting a wrongful act? This chapter teaches that we often believe to admit we are wrong is perceived as a weakness. How does it make you feel when you admit that you were wrong? When was the time you felt you had done nothing wrong, yet someone expected an apology? How did you respond?